The ring was gold, thin, simple, the kind a man wears on his left hand when he's made a promise to someone. But here's the thing. My husband was already wearing his wedding ring. He was wearing it downstairs, making breakfast, humming along to the radio the way he did every Sunday morning. I could hear the pan on the stove, I could smell the coffee. Which meant the ring I was holding, inside a small velvet-lined box, inside a locked safe, hidden behind a false panel in the back of our walk-in closet, shouldn't have existed at all. I turned it over slowly in my fingers. The light from the closet caught the inside curve of the band, and right there, in small, carefully engraved letters, I read a name I had never heard in my life. Forever. Vivian. I didn't know a Vivian. I had been married to this man for 7 years, and I had never once heard him say that name. I set the ring down. I stood completely still, and I tried to breathe through the feeling that was rising in my chest. Not panic, not yet. Something colder. Something that felt like the floor shifting under your feet in a building you thought was solid. 48 hours later, I would know who Vivian was. And when I did, I would realize that the life I had believed I was living, the house, the marriage, the man I had chosen, had never been real, not even close. Before I get into this, if you're new here, please hit subscribe and drop a like. I know that's a small thing to ask, but I promise you want to stay for everything I'm about to tell you, because the ring was only the beginning. My name is Sophia. I'm 34 years old. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer, and for 7 years I believed I had a solid marriage. Not a storybook marriage. I was never that optimistic, but a real one, the kind built on shared routines and quiet familiarity, the kind where you know exactly how your husband takes his coffee, and which side of the bed he can't sleep without, and that simple knowledge feels like a kind of wealth. I met Bruno at a conference in Chicago when I was 27. He was a financial consultant brought in by a tech firm that had hired my design agency. He walked into the meeting room wearing a charcoal suit and the easy confidence of someone who never needs to announce themselves. Within 20 minutes, he'd made everyone in the room laugh twice. I noticed both times. I had a rule about not dating people I met through work. Bruno had a way of making the rules you'd set for yourself feel quaint, like something you'd outgrow with a little more experience. I didn't find that charming until after he was gone. At the time, I just thought he was interesting. We dated for 2 years. He proposed on a Tuesday night in my kitchen. No audience, no grand production. Just him on one knee with a ring he said he'd had custom made. The diamond was small and perfect. I said yes before he finished the question. We got married the following spring in a rented barn outside Columbus, with 40 people and a playlist Bruno made himself. It was the happiest day of my life. I still believe that, in the way you believe something happened to you even when everything after it turns out to be complicated. After the wedding, we settled into a rhythm. Bruno worked in financial consulting. Long hours, a lot of travel, clients I'd never met and never really asked about. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood. We had a dog named Pepper. We argued about the thermostat and whether we were saving enough for retirement. Normal, comfortable, mine, or so I thought. The first time I noticed something that didn't fit, I filed it under stress. Bruno had been flying to New York every few weeks for almost a year. He said it was a demanding client, someone who needed hands-on portfolio management. I had no reason to question it. Travel was part of the job. But one night he came home from one of those trips and he was different. Not tired different, not distracted different, something quieter than that, something closed. He kissed me on the cheek, dropped his bag, and went straight to the kitchen to pour himself a bourbon. He stood at the counter with his back to me and drank in slow, deliberate sips. I asked if everything was okay. He said yes, and I believed him without hesitation. Looking back, that should have been my first warning. Not the silence, not the drink, the fact that I believed him so easily, without even really asking myself whether I should. The discovery happened on a Sunday in October. Bruno had left that morning for a 3-day trip to Atlanta. Some kind of merger consultation, new client, tight timeline. He kissed me goodbye at 7, told me there was leftover pasta in the fridge, and reminded me to let the exterminator in on Tuesday. That afternoon, I was looking for our home equity documents. Our mortgage broker had been calling twice a week, and I'd already gone through every drawer in the home office without finding what she needed. I knew Bruno kept important paperwork in the safe in our closet. He'd shown me the combination years ago, wrote it on a post-it note inside an old leather planner on his bookshelf. He said it was there in case of emergency. I had never actually opened the safe myself. I'd had no reason to. I went upstairs, found the planner, flipped to the inside cover. The post-it was still there, 4 numbers, his and Catherine's anniversary. That detail barely registered at the time. I knew Bruno had been married before. His first wife, Catherine, had died in a car accident about 10 years before we met. He didn't talk about her often. When he did, he spoke about her in a carefully controlled way, like the grief was real but well managed. I respected that. I didn't push. I went to the closet and pushed his suits aside. I almost didn't find it. The safe wasn't visible from the doorway. Bruno had built a shallow shelving unit that sat about an inch in front of the actual wall, and the safe was behind a false panel that swung outward if you pressed the bottom left corner. I'd known it was back there in some general sense. He'd shown me once, years ago, in the casual way of, here's where the important stuff lives. But I hadn't fully registered how deliberately concealed it was until I was standing there, pulling the panel aside, thinking, why is this hidden this well? I punched in the combination. The door swung open. Inside, a row of folders, neatly organized. A rubber-banded stack of cash, our marriage certificate. A passport I assumed was Bruno's backup, and in the far back left corner, pushed behind the folders like an afterthought, or like something that wasn't supposed to be found, a small wooden box with a hinged lid and a tarnished brass clasp. I reached for the folders first, found the home equity documents in 30 seconds. I should have stopped there. Instead, I stood in that closet staring at the wooden box. It was small enough to fit in my palm. The wood was dark, mahogany, maybe, and it had the look of something that had been carried carefully from place to place over a long time. I don't know exactly why it bothered me so much. It just looked old. It looked like something with weight to it. I picked it up. I opened it. Inside, there were 3 rings. 2 I recognized immediately. One was Bruno's current wedding band, except he was wearing that ring right now, downstairs, so this one must have been a spare or the original before he'd had it resized. Fine. The second was older, a woman's ring, a simple gold band, slightly worn along the outer edge. I assumed it was Catherine's. That made sense. Of course he would have kept it. The third ring was different. It was a man's wedding band, but nothing like Bruno's. His ring was wide and contemporary. This one was narrower, more delicate, with a subtle textured pattern along the outside. It looked newer than Catherine's ring, but older than ours. I turned it over the way you do when you're examining a piece of jewelry, and I saw the engraving. Forever, Vivienne. I remember the exact sensation, like the floor had gone soft beneath me, like the room had shifted about 2 degrees to the left and nothing was quite where it had been a moment before. My first instinct was logic. Maybe it was a family heirloom. An uncle's ring, a grandfather's. Maybe Vivienne was someone's grandmother. Maybe it had nothing to do with Bruno directly. I wanted that to be true. But sitting there on the closet floor with that ring in my hand, some quiet part of me already understood that it did. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I memorized the placement of the folders, the angle of the cash stack, the position of the box. I closed the wooden box, set it precisely where it had been, shut the safe, and pressed the false panel back into place. Then I walked downstairs, sat on the couch, and did nothing for 10 minutes. It wasn't panic, it wasn't anger. It was something colder and stiller than both. The feeling of a number that doesn't add up, and knowing you need to check the math 3 times before you'll accept what it's telling you. That evening, I opened my laptop and typed Vivienne and Bruno Webb into Google. Nothing useful. A landscaping company in Portland. A chess tournament winner. Nothing that connected my Bruno to anyone named Vivienne. I searched Ohio marriage records. Limited results. I bookmarked several paid search sites. On a whim, I typed Vivienne and Columbus and married. Nothing. Then Vivienne and Catherine and Webb. Still nothing. I closed the laptop and told myself I was overreacting. People keep rings for all kinds of reasons. There was an explanation. I just didn't have it yet. But here's what I couldn't get past. The safe wasn't merely tucked away. It was behind a false panel, inside a built-in shelving unit, in the corner of a walk-in closet. That level of concealment is deliberate. That's the work of someone who doesn't want to be found. And Bruno had never, in 7 years of marriage, mentioned a Vivienne. Not once. Not even in the way people sometimes reference the past with a careful vagueness that tells you it's there without giving you the details. I slept badly that night. Every time I got close to sleep, I saw that ring in my palm. Small letters on gold. Forever. Vivienne. The word forever bothered me more than the name, because forever is what you say to someone you actually love, or someone you want to believe you love, or someone whose trust you need to keep. I called my sister the next morning. Jenna is 3 years older than me and the most practical person I know. She works as a paralegal in Cincinnati, which means she has both a sharp eye for detail and zero patience for being managed. When I finished explaining what I'd found, she didn't make the soothing noises I half expected. She went quiet for a second. Then she said, "Tell me everything you remember about what was in the safe." I told her. Every detail I could recall. The rings were together, in the same box? All 3. She paused again. People don't keep things they've truly moved past in a hidden safe, Sophia. A photo album, sure. A box in the attic. But not a hidden safe. Whatever that ring is, it still means something to him. Something he thinks about enough to protect. I didn't say anything. Have you tried running Nevada marriage records? I don't know how to do that. I do. Give me a day. While Jenna worked on that, I pulled out our household financial documents, everything I could access outside the safe. Bank statements, credit card bills, and the investment account Bruno had set up 2 years earlier specifically to manage the inheritance from my mother. My mother had passed 18 months ago after a long illness. She'd left me a substantial amount, her house, the proceeds from my father's life insurance she'd never touched, and a retirement account she'd been building for 30 years. The total was just under $400,000. Bruno had offered to manage it. He had the expertise, he'd said. He knew how to grow it. He'd set up the account, handled the transfers, and gave me quarterly summaries, printed spreadsheets he'd put together himself, showing the portfolio's performance. I had trusted him completely. I hadn't looked at the actual statements in over a year. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled up the investment account online for the first time in months. The balance was $61,000. 18 months ago, it had been $380,000. I sat very still. $320,000. Gone. I clicked through the transaction history. Regular withdrawals, none of them small, none of them labeled clearly. Transfer to management account, portfolio rebalancing, consulting services, billed to my account, by Bruno's own firm, for the account that Bruno was managing. I had to step away from the laptop. I walked to the kitchen sink and stood there with cold water running over my hands just to feel something solid and real. When I came back, I kept reading. The withdrawals had started 6 months after my mother died. Small ones first, 10, 15,000, described as rebalancing fees, then larger, 30,000, 40,000, 2 transactions of $50,000 each, about 8 months ago. I had never been asked to approve any of them. I pulled out the original account setup documents and read through the full agreement for the first time. Buried in the back pages, in the kind of dense legal language most people skip, was a document granting Bruno full management authority over the account, including the authority to make withdrawals on my behalf. I had signed it. I remembered signing a stack of forms the day we opened the account. I hadn't read every page. I had trusted my husband. Jenna called back that afternoon. There's no marriage record in Ohio for Bruno Webb and anyone named Vivienne, she said, but I expanded the search. And? Nevada. 2009. Bruno Allen Webb and Vivienne Chen, married in Las Vegas. The room went still. 2009, I said. 3 years before I met him. 4 years after Catherine died. Exactly, so the timeline is Catherine dies 2006. Vivienne marries Bruno 2009. You marry Bruno 2014. Which means Bruno was either divorced from Vivienne before he met you, or she didn't finish. Or I married someone who was already married, I said. I'm still looking for a divorce record, Jenna said, but I haven't found one, and that's not all. She paused. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully level. The last record I can find for Vivienne Chen is from 2013, a change of address form with the Nevada DMV. After that, nothing. Sophia, no tax records, no property records, no social media presence, no obituary. She just stops. People don't just stop, not unless something happened to them. The silence between us stretched long. Jenna, I said, Catherine died in a car accident. I know. What if Catherine didn't die in an accident? Neither of us said anything for a long time. Don't say anything to Bruno, Jenna said finally. Her voice was very steady. Not yet. Don't give him any reason to think you know anything. Can you do that? I think so. Good. I'm making some calls. I don't know how I got through that evening. Bruno called from Atlanta at 7, the way he always did when he was traveling. We talked for 12 minutes. He asked about my day. I told him I'd worked on a logo project and let the exterminator in. He told me the Atlanta meetings were going well. He said he missed me. I said I missed him too. And I sat in our living room after the call with my knees pulled to my chest, looking at our wedding photo on the mantle, trying to figure out whether any part of what I was seeing in that frame had ever been real. Bruno came home 2 days later looking relaxed, the comfortable ease that follows a productive trip. He brought me a box of Georgia peach candies he knew I liked, kissed my cheek, and spent the evening on the couch watching football with Pepper draped across his legs. He looked like my husband. He looked like the person I'd chosen. I watched him from the kitchen doorway and started slowly rewinding 7 years of memory. There was the time, 2 years into our marriage, when I'd gone to his home office to borrow a charger and found him closing his laptop in a way that seemed too practiced. He'd laughed it off as a startled reflex. I'd laughed too. There was the second phone that appeared in his jacket pocket about a year ago, a different carrier, which he explained as a work phone, completely reasonable for a consultant. I never looked at it, never asked to. There were the 2 months, about 3 years ago, when his travel doubled and he came home from Phoenix looking gray-faced and said the client relationship ended badly. I'd made dinner and not asked questions. Now I was asking questions. Just not out loud. On the 3rd night after he returned, I waited until he was asleep. Then I carefully went through his jacket pocket. The work phone was there. I didn't know the lock code, but I could see the lock screen. 2 missed calls from a 702 area code, Las Vegas. I memorized the number, put the phone back, and went downstairs. In the morning, I searched the number from my laptop. It came back as a law firm, Branson and Associates, attorneys at law, Las Vegas, Nevada. I turned that over in my mind for a while. The kinds of people who use a Las Vegas attorney: divorcees, business partners, people managing complicated financial arrangements, people with things to hide in multiple states. And then another memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in months. About 8 months ago, Bruno had asked me to update my will. We'd been having one of those responsible adult conversations about what would happen to assets if one of us died suddenly. He suggested we both update ours, which had seemed perfectly reasonable. He recommended his own attorney, a man named Richard Holt I'd met once at a holiday party. I had gone in, signed a stack of documents, and trusted that Bruno had reviewed everything beforehand. I had never asked for a copy of the updated will. I pulled out my filing cabinet and searched for it. It wasn't there. I checked everywhere I could think of in the house. It was not there. A will I had signed 8 months ago, with an attorney I barely knew, recommended by my husband, was not in my possession. I called Jenna and told her I needed her in person. She arrived the next evening. We sat at the kitchen table with the financial records spread between us, and I walked her through everything. the investment account, the second phone, the Las Vegas law firm, the missing will. Jenna is not a person who shows alarm easily. By the time I finished, she looked pale. "I found something else on the drive here," she said. "I didn't want to tell you on the phone." A local news article from Phoenix, Arizona, 4 years old. The headline read, "Woman reported missing after disappearing from shared residence. Husband cooperates with police." The missing woman's name was Vivienne Chen Webb. Her husband, who had cooperated fully with police and was not named as a suspect, was listed only as B. Webb, financial consultant. Vivienne had never been found. For a full minute, neither of us spoke. I looked at the photo in the article. A small professional headshot. Vivienne Chen was beautiful. Dark hair, warm eyes, a confident smile. She looked like someone who trusted the world. She looked like someone who had no reason not to. "She looks a little like me," I said. Jenna didn't answer. She didn't need to. "He has a type," I said. We stayed up until 2 in the morning building a timeline. By the end of it, what we had was this. Bruno had been married at least 3 times. Catherine, who died in a car accident in 2006, ruled accidental. Vivienne, who married him in 2009 and disappeared in 2021, never found. Me, married in 2014, with a freshly updated will he'd steered me toward, $300,000 of my inheritance funneled into accounts I couldn't trace, and a second phone with calls to a Las Vegas attorney. The pattern was clear, even without proof. Then Sandra's name came up. Jenna had a colleague, a woman named Sandra Park, who had left legal work to become a private investigator specializing in financial crimes and missing persons cases. Jenna had used her as a resource before. "I'm calling her first thing tomorrow," Jenna said. "What if Bruno finds out?" Then we move fast. Jenna looked at me levelly. "Sophia, if this is what it looks like, and it's looking very much like what it looks like, you're not dealing with a man who cheated or embezzled. You might be sitting across the breakfast table every morning from someone who has made women disappear before." I already knew that. I'd known it since I read the article. But hearing Jenna say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been while it was still just inside my head. "I won't tip him off," I said. "Good. Jenna, I'm scared." She reached across the table and held my hand. "I know, me too." Sandra Park agreed to meet us 2 days later at a coffee shop 30 minutes from my house. She was a small, precise Korean-American woman in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and the kind of quiet that comes from having seen a lot of very bad things and learning not to be broken by them. I laid out everything I had. She listened without interrupting, taking notes in a spiral notebook. When I finished, she looked at her notes, then looked up. "The financial fraud is the cleanest charge. Unauthorized withdrawals using a management authority document the client didn't fully understand. That's wire fraud at minimum. That's a real case." "What about Vivienne?" I asked. "More complicated. He cooperated with police, which usually means either he's innocent or he's very careful. We'd need something that connects him to her disappearance." She made a note. "What about Catherine?" "A 2006 accidental death is hard to reopen, but not impossible if we can demonstrate a pattern." She looked at me directly. "I need you to behave exactly as you have been. Don't search anything from your home devices." She slid a burner phone across the table. "Use this for everything related to this, and I need you to access those financial records, the real account statements, not Bruno's printed summaries, from a library computer. Screenshot everything. Mail me the drive." I nodded. "One more thing," she said. "Does anything feel different with Bruno lately? Has he been more attentive than usual?" I thought about it. Actually, yes, he's been nicer. Bringing me coffee in the morning, suggesting we take a trip next month, asking about my work. Sandra nodded slowly. "That's consistent with what I'd expect." "With what?" She held my gaze. "With someone who's getting close to making a move." Over the next 2 weeks, Sandra dug. What she found came in pieces, each one heavier than the last. Catherine Webb's 2006 car accident outside Reno had originally drawn scrutiny. The investigating officer, a man named Dale Furrow, had flagged the brake line for additional inspection. The case was closed after automotive analysis came back inconclusive. Furrow had since retired to Idaho. Sandra tracked him down. He agreed to talk. "I always thought something was off with that case," he told her. The husband had a life insurance policy on her, which isn't unusual by itself. But she also had a family trust, and the way the estate settled after she died, it all went to him. Very smoothly. "I tried to push it further, but the DA said we didn't have enough. Do you still think there was enough to look at?" A long pause. "Yeah," Furrow said. "I do. I just couldn't prove it then." On the financial side, Sandra connected with a forensic accountant who traced the withdrawals from my inheritance account to a shell company, AW Capital Management LLC, registered in Delaware, with Bruno listed as sole managing member. He had been billing his own account for investment advisory services, billing me, and pocketing the money through a company he controlled. Sandra also traced the Las Vegas law firm. Branson and Associates handled estate planning, trust administration, and insurance policy management. Bruno had a life insurance policy, on me, for $750,000, taken out 11 months ago. I had never known about it. Technically, spousal life insurance doesn't require the insured spouse's knowledge in most states. Legally, that policy wasn't a crime by itself. But combined with everything else, it was a very clear picture of where this was heading. I want you to sit with that for a moment. He had taken out a $750,000 life insurance policy on me. He had drained most of my inheritance. He was talking about a remote cabin trip, off the grid. The Vivian thread remained the most uncertain piece. Sandra found records suggesting Vivian Chen Webb had opened a bank account in Los Angeles 3 years ago under a slightly different name. Vivian Chen, no hyphen, no Webb. Several transactions over 6 months, then nothing. "She might be alive," Sandra said during one of our calls. "She might be hiding. Can you find her?" "I'm working on it." In the meantime, I was living in my house, sleeping in my bed, eating breakfast across from Bruno Webb every morning, and pretending everything was fine. It was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. There were moments, ordinary, quiet moments, him reading the paper or laughing at something on television, when doubt crept in. "Maybe I'm wrong," that voice would say. "Maybe the ring was an heirloom. Maybe the money has an explanation I'm missing. Maybe I'm building a conspiracy out of fragments that don't actually connect." And then I would remember, forever, Vivian, and a woman reported missing who was never found, and a safe hidden behind a false wall. And I would stay steady. One evening, about 10 days in, Bruno sat across from me at dinner and said, "I found a cabin, private property rental. Owner says you can go a full week without cell service if you want. Wouldn't that be perfect?" "It sounds amazing," I said. "I'll look at dates when I'm back from Chicago." I smiled. I nodded. I poured us both more coffee. That night I typed on the burner phone under the covers. "He's still talking about the cabin. Please tell me you're close." She called me the next morning. I found Vivian. I pulled over to the side of the road. My hands were shaking. "She's alive. She's in Portland, Oregon. She's been living under a different name for 3 years. I explained the situation, and she agreed to talk to me. I pressed my hand flat against the steering wheel. "She ran," Sandra said. About a year into their marriage, she found irregularities, financial patterns, money she couldn't account for. He'd also started isolating her from her family, slowly, subtly. The way those things happen, gradually enough that you almost don't notice it while it's happening. She got out before anything worse could occur. She's been afraid to come forward because she had no concrete proof of anything criminal, and she was terrified that drawing attention to herself would let him find her. Will she help now? She already did. I have 2 hours of recorded testimony. Her account of the financial patterns alone corroborates your own situation almost exactly. Sandra paused. Sophia, combined with the investment account fraud, the false identity document in the safe, the shell company, Furrow's statement about Catherine's case, we have enough to take this to law enforcement. What law enforcement? Local police? No, not local. If local police tip him off before they're ready to move, he runs. He has money, contacts, and experience disappearing. We go directly to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I have a contact there. Her name is Agent Torres. She needs to see everything packaged and ready. Tell me exactly what to do. Agent Torres reviewed what Sandra sent her within 48 hours. She called me directly. Her voice was businesslike and calm. The financial fraud is clear and actionable. The other matters are going to take more time to build fully, but what you've given us is enough to open a formal investigation. I need one more thing from you first. What do you need? I need photographs of everything inside that safe, the original images, not descriptions. Can you do that safely? Yes. When you know he'll be gone for at least 2 hours, use the burner. Don't move anything. Just photograph everything you can see. The following week, Bruno had a client lunch he said would run about 3 hours. The moment his car left the driveway, I went upstairs. My hands were shaking so badly I had to stop at the safe, breathe for 30 seconds, and try the combination again. The door swung open. Everything was still there. I photographed each folder label, the cash stack, the wooden box from every angle, each ring individually, close-ups of the engraving, Forever, Vivienne. Each document I could see without disturbing anything. Then I picked up the passport. I opened it carefully. Bruno's face looked back at me, his exact face, but the name printed in clean black letters read, Bruno Allen Weaver, not Webb, Weaver. I had been married for 7 years to a man who had a false identity document in his hidden safe, and I hadn't known his real name. I photographed every page. I put everything back, closed the safe, pressed the panel into place, walked downstairs on legs that didn't quite feel connected to the rest of me. I uploaded the photos to the encrypted drive and sent Sandra the notification code. She called within the hour. The passport alone is a federal crime, she said. Agent Torres is moving forward. She wants to execute this in Chicago, not at your house, somewhere controlled. You said he has a conference there next week? Tuesday through Thursday. Good. That's very good. 1 more week, Sophia. Those 7 days were not manageable. I want to be honest about that. Every morning I woke up beside Bruno Weaver, or whoever he truly was, and felt like I was made of glass. Every time he was kind to me, I had to decide whether to read it as genuine warmth or deliberate performance, and the thing I could never fully resolve was that both could be true simultaneously. Both things could live in the same person. That was its own kind of horror. On the 5th day, he mentioned the cabin again. He'd found a listing. Private property, 4 hours north, a lake, no cell service for miles. I'll book it when I'm back from Chicago, he said. That would be wonderful, I said. Bruno flew to Chicago on a Tuesday. I spent Tuesday night at Jenna's apartment in Cincinnati. We sat in her kitchen until almost midnight. There wasn't much to say. Either it worked or it didn't. Either we'd done enough or we hadn't. At 9:47 Wednesday morning, the burner phone buzzed. Sandra, he's in custody. Torres has him. I held the phone against my chest and closed my eyes. It buzzed again a moment later. He asked for a lawyer immediately. Didn't deny anything. Didn't confirm anything. Torres said he looked, I'm quoting her directly, completely unsurprised. That detail hit me harder than I expected, not surprised. Like he had known this was always how it would eventually go. Like he had simply been calculating how long he could make it last. I was allowed to return home that afternoon after the search team had already executed their warrant. A female agent met me at the door and walked me through what they'd taken. The wooden box, the folders, the passport, several documents from the home office I hadn't even known existed. I stood in the closet doorway and looked at the open safe. The box was gone. The false identity document was gone. The rings were in an evidence bag. All 3 of them. I thought about Catherine. I thought about Vivienne. I thought about myself standing in this same closet 8 weeks ago, thinking I was just looking for a mortgage document, with no idea what was waiting for me behind that false panel. I thought about how close I had come to not opening the wooden box. I did come face to face with Bruno again, 3 weeks later, at a preliminary hearing. My lawyer told me I didn't need to be there. It was procedural, nothing dramatic, but I needed to see him in that context. Across a courtroom, not across a breakfast table. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, he was still the same man, same posture, same careful grooming, but something had gone out of him, that easy, ambient warmth that had made rooms feel lighter when he walked in, the thing that had never been real. It was gone now, and without it he just looked like what he was, a man in a suit calculating outcomes. He glanced at me once. Something moved across his face, not guilt, not remorse, more like an assessment, like he was still, even then, trying to determine what the most useful expression to show me would be. Then he looked away. I've thought a great deal since then about what he actually is. I don't believe Bruno was born a monster. I think he was someone who discovered early that he had a rare ability to read people, to make them feel genuinely seen and chosen, to reflect back exactly what someone needed to see. And at some point, gradually, through Catherine and Vivian and me, that ability became a tool rather than a quality. He didn't feel the things he performed, he only knew how to perform them. That's the thing about people like him that nobody warns you about. They're not cold. They're not unpleasant. They don't show you anything alarming until you're already 3 layers deep and the door has closed quietly behind you. By the time the feeling surfaces that something is wrong, you've been doubting yourself for so long you've trained yourself not to trust it. I want to stop here for a second and ask you something directly. If you found what I found, those rings, the financial records, the false passport, what would you have done? Would you have confronted him that night, packed a bag and left? I made the decision to stay quiet and gather evidence, and it worked. But it might not have. It was an enormous risk. Let me know in the comments what you think you would have done. I read every single one. The federal charges against Bruno included wire fraud, securities fraud, and identity fraud. The wire fraud charges alone carried potential sentencing up to 20 years. The Phoenix Police Department reopened their investigation into Vivian's disappearance using the information Sandra and Agent Torres provided. The Reno County Sheriff's Office requested Bruno's complete financial history going back to 2005, the year before Catherine died. None of that resolved quickly. These things never do. On the financial side, the forensic accountant traced $270,000 of the money Bruno had withdrawn from my inheritance account. Most of it was sitting in the AW Capital Delaware accounts, which were frozen on the day of his arrest. My attorney filed a civil suit alongside the criminal proceedings. 11 months later, I had a check for $240,000. Not everything, but most of it. And 4 months after Bruno's arrest, Vivian reached out to me directly. She sent a short email. She said she was sorry she hadn't come forward sooner. She said she'd been so afraid for so long that staying invisible had felt like the only safe option. She said she hoped I was doing all right. I wrote back and told her I was. I told her I was glad she was safe. I told her that her testimony had been part of what made the case possible. We ended up talking on the phone a few times after that. She is a careful person, understandably. There's a wariness in her that I recognized because I was carrying something similar. But she was also funny in this dry, understated way, and there was genuine warmth underneath the caution. She told me the thing that had finally made her run was finding a prescription medication in the bathroom cabinet that wasn't prescribed to Bruno. She looked it up and found that in high doses it treated a specific cardiac arrhythmia, but in low doses, mixed with alcohol, it could cause cardiac events that appeared to be natural causes. She hadn't been able to prove he was planning to use it. She had simply known, in the way you know something in your body before you can articulate it, that she needed to be gone. She left the next day. She never looked back. That medication was now part of the Phoenix investigation. Combined with the financial patterns that mirrored what had preceded Catherine's death, a much larger case was beginning to take shape. I filed for divorce 4 months after Bruno's arrest. The house sold 8 months later. I split the proceeds per the court order, netted enough to start over, and moved to a mid-sized city 2 states away. Not for any dramatic reason. I just needed a place that didn't carry the weight of a life built entirely on someone else's lies. I kept Pepper. I went back to therapy. I'd seen someone briefly after my mother died, and I returned to her now because I needed to work through something that didn't have a clean name. Not just the fear or the anger, but the grief of it. The grief of having loved something, a marriage, a person, a whole constructed life, that turned out to never have been what you believed. That is a strange thing to mourn. You're not grieving a person exactly, because the person you thought you knew didn't fully exist. You're grieving the belief, the certainty. The mornings over coffee and the dog on the couch and the drive to the barn on your wedding day at 29 years old, completely sure about who you were choosing. My therapist said something once that I keep coming back to. She said, the love you felt was real, even if the person who received it wasn't. I've sat with that for a long time. The love was real. The hope was real. The decision to trust was real. None of those things were made foolish by what came after. I wasn't naive. I wasn't blind. I was a person who trusted someone and was deceived by someone who had spent years learning precisely how to do that. That is not my failing. That is his. Knowing that in your head and knowing it in your bones are two separate processes. The head gets there first, the bones take longer. It has been about 2 years since I stood in that closet holding a ring I didn't recognize with a name I'd never heard. Forever. Vivian. Vivian is doing well. She lives quietly. She has a job she likes. She is careful in the specific way that people who have survived something are careful. She is not the woman in that warm professional headshot anymore. But she is here. She got out. I think about that more than almost anything. Bruno's federal fraud trial started last fall. The Catherine investigation in Reno is still open. Some things take a very long time to prove. Some things may never be fully provable. And I've done the work of making my peace with that uncertainty, mostly. What I carry with me, the image I can't entirely set down, is that wooden box. Sitting in the corner of a hidden safe, behind a false panel, in the closet of a house I thought was mine. 3 rings, 3 women, 3 promises made by someone who understood exactly how to make a promise sound real. I think about who else might not have found it. What my life would look like right now if I'd never needed that mortgage document, if I'd trusted the quarterly spreadsheets, if I'd signed everything put in front of me and agreed to a remote cabin in the woods in November. I don't stay in that thought long, but I visit it sometimes, because here is what I know. I found the box. I asked the questions. I stayed steady when every part of me wanted to run or collapse or confront him right there across the kitchen table. I trusted the people who helped me, and I got out. If there is anything I want you to take from this, it is not a tidy lesson about red flags, or a list of warning signs, or advice about who to trust and who not to. Life is more complicated than that, and so are the people in it. It is simpler than that. When something doesn't add up, even in a life that looks perfectly fine from the outside, even when everything visible says you're safe, trust that feeling. Don't file it away. Don't let the comfort of the familiar talk you out of what your instincts are already quietly telling you. I almost ignored it. I am so glad I didn't. If this story stayed with you, I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I read everything you leave there. And if you'd like to be here for the next story, subscribe if you haven't already. I share stories like this one regularly, and each one is told as honestly as I know how to tell it. There is another story waiting for you on your screen right now, if you want to keep watching. Take good care of yourself. And remember, you know yourself better than anyone else ever will. Trust that.